Hello and welcome to today's video, and today I'm going to be talking about some quite easy ways that you can improve your improvisation and guitar soloing. And I'm actually tempted to give this video a bit of a clickbaity title, kind of 10 ways to fix your soloing and sound more professional or something along those lines. I know that's a bit naff, but that's really just part and parcel of doing this YouTube thing and kind of getting people to watch these videos. But I hope this video does deliver in terms of giving you a bit of substance and some actual ideas that you can use. Now, in my teaching experience, I come across quite a lot of players who are not beginners and actually know quite a lot of stuff, and they're pretty good, but their soloing just lacks a little bit of style and fluency. And of course, to get really stylish and really fluent, you just need to put in hours and hours of practice, blah, blah, blah. Of course, you need to do that. But I think there are a handful of quite simple things that you can try, and you can start to sound better more or less right away. And some of these things are technique stuff, and other things are more just attitude or mindset changes that you can quite quickly make. And I'm talking in terms of guitar soloing and improvisation today, but I think some of these things that I'm going to talk about you can equally apply to rhythm guitar playing. So let's get started. This first suggestion is a very simple one, but I think very effective, and it's simply to use slides to get into and out of some of your phrases. It's something you can start doing right away, and immediately it adds a little bit more fluidity to your playing. So let me give you an example. So let's take an opening phrase to a solo, and today I'm going to be playing in the key of A minor. The backing track that I played over at the start was just a simple 2-chord pattern in the key of A minor, and I was primarily soloing using the A minor pentatonic scale. So let's say we've got an opening phrase that goes something like this. So a reasonably nice opening phrase, but what if I slide into the first note of that phrase and then slide out of the final note? So that would sound like this. To me, that just sounds a lot better. This just sounds a little bit wooden and stilted, but throw in those slides. It sounds a little bit more confident and relaxed. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to do that on every single phrase, but often it does feel good just to slide into and out of the opening and the last notes in each of your phrases. Muting is a hugely important thing, and it's something that's not really spoken about enough by guitar teachers, I don't think. Probably because it's not a particularly exciting or glamorous technique, but it is super important, particularly if you're playing electric guitar and you're using overdrive and distortion. Unless you've got your muting sorted out, then things are just going to get messy. You're going to have random notes, random open strings. And I suppose that's one of the sort of signs of a more inexperienced player, if they're having trouble keeping things clean and under control. And of course there's a place for more wild, kind of messy playing. That's something I sometimes do as well, but for the most part you want to try and keep things nice and under control. You just want to hear the notes you want to hear. You don't want any other random open strings or anything like that. And both hands have an important role to play when it comes to muting. And if we start by looking at the picking hand, again, I'm just going to demonstrate this using the A minor pentatonic scale. If I'm playing something on the higher strings in this scale, then my picking hand is always going to be resting on the lower strings to mute them and to keep them under control. So all of the time that I'm playing those notes, I'm literally just pressing down, sitting on the lower strings, and I'm kind of using that part of my hand. It's kind of the side or a bit further round on the palm of my picking hand, just to keep those lower strings under control. And then if I want to come up and play on some of the other strings, then I'm just moving my hand upwards to take that mute away from the strings. So if I'm playing on the low E string, then I'm not touching the strings at all with this hand. So that's an important thing to get used to. I think right from the outset, if you're a complete beginner and you're interested in playing solos and lead guitar. Just pay attention to the hand position here. Make sure that you're holding the pick in such a way and that your wrist is positioned in such a way that you're able to touch and rest on those lower strings. And then the fretting hand has an equally important role to play when it comes to muting. So quite often you'll see me wrapping my thumb around the top of the neck, and sometimes I'm actually playing notes with my thumb, but often I'm just touching the low E string, maybe the A string as well, just to keep those notes muted, those strings muted and under control. If I'm fretting a note here, very often I'm touching the string above with the tip of whichever finger it is I'm using. So if I play this D note here, 7th fret on the 3rd string, the tip of that finger is actually touching the 4th string, just so it's muted and there's no chance that it's going to ring out. And then I might also use the other fingers on this hand just to touch the strings behind the fretted note, again just as insurance against any unwanted string noise. And also the underside of the fingers is important too. So if I'm using the tip to mute the string above, I'm using the underside of these fingers very often to mute the strings above. So if I play this A note here, I'm muting the 5th string with the tip of this 3rd finger. I'm leaning down to just touch the 3rd string, and to keep that muted I'm going to use these 2 fingers here to touch the 1st and 2nd strings. My thumb is going to be wrapped around the top of the neck, so I can actually then hit all of the strings quite aggressively, and only one note is going to pop out because I've got all of the other strings muted. So both hands got a really important role to play here. You've got your fretting hand, and then I'm palm muting with this hand. Sometimes I might even touch strings with the free fingers on my picking hand as well to keep them muted. So both hands doing important jobs here. When I break it down like that, it does seem like there's a lot going on and a lot to think about, and it does take a while to get instinctive with that stuff, but it's a really good habit to get into, and pretty soon you'll find that you don't have to think about that stuff at all. It's just always in place, this muting, and your playing's going to sound better for it and a lot cleaner. This is something that I've spoken about quite a lot in my videos. I'm not going to apologise for repeating myself, just because I think it's so important. And it's something I hear quite a lot in even some pretty good players, is that they don't really play clear and memorable phrases. This is something that I think is so important. Try and play clear phrases, and often that means playing quite simply, not having so many notes, and leaving a bit of space as well. And then you've got somewhere to go. If you start a solo with a nice clear phrase, then it's something to build on. Let me try and explain what I mean. So let's say we've got an opening phrase to our solo, again in the key of A minor. Let's have this. So nothing spectacular there, but it's a clear phrase. It's clear rhythmically, it's not too long, and you can remember it. I can remember what I just played, which is important. You need to be able to sing or to hum these phrases. If you can't remember what it is that you just played, then you can't expect your audience to remember it either, and you can't expect them to respond to it in any kind of way. And then if we've got our clear opening phrase, leave a bit of space, and then I could develop that. So maybe so a classic kind of call and response. You've got your call, and then I'm going to respond to that, and it kind of starts the same way, but then it goes a bit higher. And then maybe I could respond to that, maybe a bit of a longer phrase. So you've got a kind of 3-part phrase there. Your opening idea, and then I develop that a little bit, and then I develop it again. So it's a really solid structure to a solo, starting it off something like that. Think about where you're starting your phrases rhythmically, and many players always seem to start their phrases on beat 1, and of course there's nothing wrong with sometimes starting your phrases on beat 1, but if that's all that you do, then quite quickly your playing just becomes predictable and boring. So think about the other places where you might like to start your phrases. So if you just think about the strong beats to start with, you could come in on beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. And then if you think about the other subdivisions, the ands or the 16th note subdivisions, you've got so many options to spice up your licks and ideas in terms of the rhythm. Let me try and give you an example. So let's say we've got this phrase. Very simple pentatonic phrase. So starting on this high A note, coming down the scale, and then ending with a slide from G up to A. So obvious thing to do would be to start that phrase on beat 1. So 3, 4. Nothing wrong with that, but what if we started it on beat 4 instead? So 2, 3. So then we're hitting this G note on beat 1 and then sliding into the A at the start of the bar. So 2, 3. So it gives exactly the same notes, a very different feeling just by changing where you come in. We could move it around again. Maybe we could come in on beat 2. So 3, 4, 1. Again, it works, but it gives those notes a slightly different feeling. So this is something that you can explore. I think this is a great exercise. Just take a simple phrase like that one and see how many different places you can find to come in during the bar. So start with the strong beats, then maybe explore starting on some of the ands or some of the other subdivisions. And it's a really good habit to get into, just being aware of where you're starting your phrases. Something else you might like to try is raking into some of the notes in your solo, and I love the sound of this, and it's a great way of adding a bit of style to your solos. It's this kind of technique, and I suppose it's, in a way, it's similar to sliding into notes. It's a way of giving the notes a bit of an accent, a bit of emphasis. Though this technique is slightly trickier to get to grips with, I think, but it's not impossible. I think with a little bit of practice you should be able to get this together. So the way it works is like this. Let's just, for example, play this note here, this C. It's the 8th fret on the high E string, and before I hit that note, I've got this series of muted notes on the lower strings. I'm just dragging my pick across the muted notes before I'm hitting my target C note. And the way I'm achieving those muted notes is primarily just by resting the side or the palm of my picking hand on those lower strings. So those strings are completely dead. I'm just dragging my pick across those strings and then hitting that target note. So it's mainly picking hand muting. There is a little bit of fretting hand muting going on here as well. So I'm actually muting the string above with my third finger. I've got my first and second fingers muting the strings below as well. So two types of muting I've spoken about in this video. The first type is where you're muting just to keep the strings under control and to keep things clean. And here I'm using muting more as a kind of expressive effect, just to get that rake effect into notes. But some of the techniques involved are the same, although they're exactly the same, I suppose. So that's our basic muting, raking technique rather, and a good exercise would just be to play notes on the high E string to start with. I think that's the easiest way to get to grips with this technique. So maybe just find some notes in that pentatonic scale and just practice cleanly raking into those notes. It's a cool effect, something that you probably wouldn't want to overdo. I just do it occasionally just to add real emphasis to a note, but it does have a nice dramatic effect. I want to talk a bit more about rhythm, and at the risk of stating the obvious, you want to groove and to lock in, with whatever the context is that you're playing in. So whether you're playing with another guitar player, maybe you're playing with a band or you're playing along to a backing track, whatever it is, you want to find the pulse and the rhythm and lock into it. And this is where it's really important to listen. So you want to listen to what the other musicians are doing. In particular, you want to listen to the drums. They're often going to be establishing the overall feel. So there's going to be the overall tempo, kind of the BPM where the strong beat is. And there's also usually going to be some kind of subdivision suggested as well. And that's often a really good starting point as a soloist, as a kind of rhythmic thing that you can emulate and try and lock into. And taking today's backing track as an example, it's got that kind of soul funk kind of a feel, a little bit Bill Withers, I guess. And the actual tempo is quite slow. I think it's about 70 BPM. But the drums have got this 16th note hi-hat thing going on. It's a very distinctive kind of a feel, and as a guitar player that's kind of what I want to lock into. I'm listening to the hi-hat, and then a lot of my phrasing is based around those kind of 16th note subdivisions. It's not to say that everything I play is going to be 16th notes. That's going to be my starting point, and then of course I can play around with that and develop things and experiment with some other rhythms that maybe go a little bit against the natural feel of the track. But with this particular track, it's got that sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got that 1 and a 2 and a 3, that kind of 16th note feel. So a lot of my melodies are going to be based around that feel. So there's some syncopation in there as well, but it's all really based on that, feeling those underlying 16th notes. Another little technique thing you could try is cutting notes off at the top of a bend, and this is a great sound, and it kind of signals that you're in control and that you know what you're doing. You don't always have to do this, but it does sound cool, I think. And when you're first learning to bend on the guitar, it's a struggle just to get the note up and down again without having to worry about muting notes. But once you got the basic technique under your fingers, you might like to, instead of going having the note always go up and down, you might like to go something like that. So I'm bending up, and then once the note is at the top of the bend, I'm stopping it, and I'm doing that once again with muting, picking hand muting. So just touching the note with this hand, and then you hear the note go up and then it stops. You're not hearing it come back down again. It's a great way of giving a note a little bit of emphasis, and it's just got that nice kind of authority to it. You don't have to do that on every single note, but it's a really good habit to get into. So as an exercise, you might like to go through your minor pentatonic scale, so the good bending notes in that scale. So that one there, and maybe this one. You can even add vibrato to a bend and then stop the note after you've added a bit of vibrato. So it's a cool technique and worth playing around with. Another really important expressive tool that you've got is vibrato, and this is such a great way of adding style and personality to a solo. And I'm not going to go into all the details about vibrato technique in this video. I have done a complete video on vibrato, which you might like to check out if you're interested. There are lots of different ways to do it. Various different players do it in different ways. But the important thing is to do it with a bit of conviction, I think. So personally, I've generally got a kind of up and down movement with the vibrato. So I'm kind of bending and releasing the string. And the primary sort of factors in the sound of your vibrato are how wide the vibrato is and the speed of your vibrato. So by width, I mean how much are you pulling the string, how much are you bending the string, and then speed is obviously how many of those bends you've got in a given amount of time. And I suppose my personal vibrato is kind of medium on both those counts. So it's a medium speed and a medium width. You might like to vary that depending on the context. But one thing I would say is it's important not to be timid. Some players, when they're using vibrato, it's kind of kind of like that, and you can barely hear it because it's so shallow. So really exaggerate the vibrato. I think that sounds particularly good if you're recording or if you're on stage. It's almost like you're an actor. You kind of have to exaggerate things if you're on the stage and project to the the back row of the auditorium or whatever it is. It's a similar thing with vibrato. If you just kind of doing that in the context of a band, it's barely noticeable. So you really want to have really kind of exaggerate that movement, and I think it's going to sound good. Dynamics is a really big one. It really sounds so good when you hear a player who's got a great touch and it is really dynamic. Sometimes they're playing very delicately and softly. Sometimes they're really digging in and going for it. And it's amazing how many guitar players, particularly electric guitar players, don't seem to have any dynamics at all in their playing. And of course, it's easier to add dynamics in some contexts than in others. If you're playing in a punk band or a loud rock track, then you've got quite limited room for dynamics. You really just have to play as loud as you can and go for it, and that's totally cool. But in other situations where you've got a bit more space, maybe the other instruments aren't doing very much, they've allowed space for the soloist, then you can really emphasize dynamics. You might like to start your solo quite delicately and then dig in with some louder phrases and really mix it up a little bit. I tried to do that a little bit in my solo at the start of this video. I started off playing quite softly, trying to play quite sensitively, and then I had a few licks where I was digging in and playing a little bit harder. So it's definitely something important to work on. So practice playing as softly as you can. A bit more loudly, maybe adding in some accents. There are going to be times when you really want to go for it and play quite hard as well. And my final point, which follows on from the last point really, is to make sure that you're always playing with a bit of attitude and a bit of passion. And you don't want to be one of these players who's always worried about playing a wrong note or making a mistake, and therefore you play in this kind of timid way. And particularly if you're a beginner, it's hard, and you are worried about playing wrong notes and all the rest of it. But you never get to the stage where you're not playing wrong notes. I mean, every player is going to play wrong notes from time to time, but the best players aren't concerned about it. It doesn't bother them. It's not going to get in the way of them expressing themselves on the instrument. So as soon as you can start thinking like that, the better. And just kind of dig in and make some noise, play with some passion. It's just going to sound so much better than playing in this very kind of timid, nervous way. So 10 or so ideas there. Have a play around with those. I hope you're able to get some of those into your own playing. If you'd like to, you can download my backing track and play along with that and try and implement some of those ideas and skills. Say it's in the key of A minor, you can just use the A minor pentatonic scale, or actually the A Dorian mode works really well against that backing track as well. So give that a try. Even if you don't want to download my backing track, you could just create a loop yourself, just A minor going to D and then play over that loop. That is it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching. If you're not already a subscriber to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. That's another thing that I hate saying, but it does actually help me grow and build this channel and to keep on doing this. And if you've not checked out my Patreon page, then you might like to do that as well. You can get hold of the tabs related to this video and my backing track. And there's also going to be a little bit of bonus content, an extra video just available on the Patreon page where I can go into some of the things I spoke about in this video in a little bit more depth. So check that out if you're interested, and I'll see you next time.